All right, so get ready because today we are taking a deep dive straight into ancient India.
Ooh, I love ancient India.
Yeah, me too. We are talking specifically about the Mahajanapada period. Like that era between 600 and 300 BCE.
Ah, yes, yes. A truly fascinating time.
Seriously. And when I think about this period, it's like it's not just the rise of these new city-states,
Mhm.
that I find totally mind-blowing,
Right.
but it's this, like, explosion of thought, philosophical thought. It's like ancient India was having this, like, giant internal debate about, life, the universe, and everything.
What's so fascinating is this period wasn't just a historical footnote, right? I mean, it was really a philosophical battleground. You had these completely different understandings of reality and,
Yeah.
like, the human condition were just emerging
Yeah.
and often clashing head-on with the established Vedic traditions.
Okay, so to set the scene a little bit,
Right.
we've got these Vedic texts, right? They've already been around for centuries.
Mhm.
You've got the Rig Veda, the Sama Veda, the Yajur Veda, and the Harva Veda.
The bedrock of Hinduism.
Right. And I just remember, like, when I first started reading those texts, just being struck by the poetic language
Yeah.
and all those layered meanings. It's like they're trying to convey something beyond the literal words.
It's true. The Vedas were foundational for Hinduism, right? And they laid out a complex cosmology and worldview, but they weren't just these like abstract ideas, right? They had a real impact on how people actually lived their lives, from the rituals they performed to even like the social order itself.
Yeah, and embedded in these texts are these, like, core concepts,
Hmm.
like Brahman, Atman, Dharma, and Karma.
Huge.
Yeah. Can you give us a quick breakdown of those again, just so we're all on the same page before we, dive even deeper?
Absolutely. So think of Brahman as like the ultimate reality, the cosmic principle underlying everything. Beyond human comprehension truly, but it is the source of all existence.
Okay, so Brahman's the big picture, the ultimate source.
Right.
What about Atman? Then how's that different?
So, Atman is your individual soul, the spark of the divine within you. And here's where it gets interesting. The Vedas, they actually suggest that Atman is essentially identical to Brahman.
Whoa.
So in a way, each individual is connected to this ultimate reality.
We're all part of something much bigger than ourselves.
Absolutely.
I kind of like that idea.
Yeah, yeah.
But what about Dharma and Karma? Those always seem a bit tricky to really, like, grasp.
Sure. So dharma is often translated as duty or righteousness, but it's more about living in alignment with that cosmic order.
Okay.
It's doing what's right, not just for you, but for the universe as a whole.
Right.
And karma is that principle of cause and effect. Your actions have consequences. And these ripple out not just in this life, but potentially across lifetimes.
So we got this Vedic foundation, right? With these big ideas about ultimate reality, duty, cosmic consequences. Then, boom, Mahajanapada period hit.
Things get really interesting.
Things get really interesting, yeah. You see these new schools of thought emerging,
Right.
and they're, like, actively challenging these established Vedic ideas. What was driving that shift?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, this was a time of intense, social and political change.
Yeah.
That the old ways were being questioned,
Yeah.
and people, they were looking for new answers. Out of this turmoil came two major movements that really shook things up:
Okay.
Buddhism and Jainism.
Right. Buddhism and Jainism. Even today, I mean, those names, they carry so much weight.
Of course.
They've become, like, global movements.
Global.
But what were they reacting to? What were they offering that was so different from the traditional Vedic worldview?
So think about it this way. The Vedic tradition, it placed a lot of emphasis on rituals and sacrifices,
Right.
often mediated by a priestly class.
Yeah.
But what if you didn't have access to those rituals?
Right.
What if you questioned their efficacy? What if you were seeking a more direct path to, like, spiritual liberation? That's where Buddhism and Jainism came in.
So they were offering, like, a more individualized path,
Exactly.
bypassing the gatekeepers.
Exactly.
Fascinating. Let's start with Buddhism. Who was, like, the driving force behind it? And what were the core tenets that set it apart from the Vedic tradition?
So Buddhism was founded by Siddhartha Gautama, who became known as the Buddha.
The Buddha. Okay.
And his central teaching focused on the problem of suffering.
Yeah.
He saw suffering as this inherent part of existence, something we all experience.
Okay, that doesn't sound very uplifting. Was Buddhism just about, like, acknowledging how much life sucks?
Not exactly.
Yeah.
So the Buddha offered a way out of suffering. He laid out the Four Noble Truths. And these start by acknowledging that, yes, life is suffering, but then go on to identify the cause of suffering,
Okay.
desire or attachment. And then they offer a path to liberation from that suffering through the Eightfold Path.
So it's not just wallowing in misery, it's about understanding the cause and then actively working towards liberation.
Absolutely.
But what exactly is the Eightfold Path? Is it like some kind of ancient self-help program?
I mean, it's more than that. The Eightfold Path is a set of guidelines for like right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration.
Wow, that sounds pretty intense.
Yes.
But you mentioned liberation. What did that look like in Buddhism? Was it about like go to heaven or something?
So the ultimate goal in Buddhism is nirvana.
Nirvana.
And it's not a place you go to,
Okay.
but a state of being you achieve. It's the complete cessation of suffering and that cycle of rebirth.
So no pearly gates, just pure liberation from suffering.
Exactly.
I can see why that would be appealing,
Right.
especially during a time of, social and political upheaval.
Absolutely.
But how did this clash with the traditional Vedic worldview?
So Buddhism challenged the authority of the Vedas and the Brahmins, who served as these intermediaries between humans and the divine. And it didn't require elaborate rituals or sacrifices. It emphasized personal responsibility, ethical conduct, and meditation as that path to enlightenment.
It's a radical shift in both spiritual and social terms.
Right.
I mean, while Buddhism was gaining traction, this other new philosophy was emerging.
Right.
That also offered a path to liberation. Jainism.
Yeah.
What made Jainism stand out?
So Jainism, founded by Mahavira, it shared some similarities with Buddhism, like the belief in karma and reincarnation.
Okay.
But it went even further in emphasizing nonviolence and asceticism as that path to liberation.
Nonviolence, or ahimsa, as they called it.
Ahimsa.
That's a pretty radical concept, especially back then. How did they put that into practice?
Well, for Jains, ahimsa extended to all living beings, no matter how small or insignificant.
Wow.
They believed that even the smallest actions could have karmic consequences, so they were incredibly careful not to harm any living creature.
So no swatting mosquitoes for them.
Yeah.
But what about asceticism? Was that just about, like, giving up material possessions?
More than that, asceticism for Jains involved rigorous self-discipline and a real renunciation of worldly pleasures. They believed that by detaching themselves from material things and desires, they could purify their souls
Right.
and escape that cycle of rebirth.
Okay, so we've got these two new philosophies, right?
Yeah.
Buddhism and Jainism, both kind of challenging the established Vedic tradition.
Uh-huh.
Were these just isolated movements, or were they, like, engaging with each other?
What's fascinating is that the Mahajanapada period wasn't just about these individual philosophies emerging in isolation, right? It was a time of vibrant intellectual exchange.
Okay.
Thinkers from different schools of thought, they engaged in lively debates, challenging each other's ideas and refining their own.
So it was like a philosophical battle royale.
Kind of. But it was also much more than that. It was a period of tremendous intellectual ferment.
Yeah.
People were grappling with something the biggest questions humanity has ever asked. What is the nature of reality? What is the meaning of life? What is the right way to live? And out of these debates emerged new ways of thinking about ourselves and the world around us.
Wow.
Really is amazing.
That is incredible to think about.
It is.
It's just mind-blowing to think about all these, like, different philosophies clashing, evolving, all side by side.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, like, did these debates ever spill out of the, philosophical realm?
Oh, absolutely.
Did they, like, impact the political landscape at the time?
You can't separate these intellectual currents from, like, the political realities of the Mahajanapada period.
Right.
I mean, remember, this was a time when you had 16 powerful city-states, kingdoms, all vying for power across northern India.
Yeah.
They were constantly forming alliances, engaging in warfare, trying to outmaneuver each other.
So it was like a real-life Game of Thrones, but with, like, philosophical debates happening in the background.
Yeah, you could say that. But the interesting thing is that the rulers of these Mahajanapadas, they weren't immune to the philosophical ferment happening around them.
Yeah.
In fact, some of them actually actively engaged with these new ideas and used them to, like, shape their policies and legitimize their rule.
So these abstract philosophical ideas weren't just, like, ivory tower concepts.
No.
They had real-world implications.
Absolutely. Take the concept of Dharma, for instance.
Okay.
It wasn't just, a personal ethical framework. It also applied to rulers.
Yeah.
There was this idea that a righteous king, a dharmic king, would rule justly, protect his people, and uphold that cosmic order.
So even in the midst of all the, like, power struggles and political maneuvering,
Right.
there was this underlying belief that, like, rulers had this moral obligation to govern ethically.
Precisely. And this wasn't just a theoretical concept. It had practical implications for how kingdoms were governed.
Right.
Laws were made, justice was administered.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how these philosophical ideas could kind of like seep into the political sphere. But did these new philosophies, like Buddhism and Jainism, which challenged those traditional Vedic ideas, did they have any direct impact on, like, governance?
One of the most striking examples is the reign of Ashoka the Great, the Mauryan emperor who ruled in the 3rd century BCE.
Okay, Ashoka, yeah. Wasn't he the one who, like, converted to Buddhism?
That's right.
Okay.
Ashoka's conversion to Buddhism, it wasn't just a personal transformation. It became a cornerstone of his political philosophy. He renounced violence, embraced the principle of ahimsa, and made it a central tenet of his rule.
So the emperor himself embraced this radical idea of nonviolence and tried to, like, apply it to his empire.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Did it work?
Well, it's a complex story. Ashoka's reign, it was marked by a commitment to peace and social welfare.
Right.
He built hospitals, promoted vegetarianism, and even sent out emissaries to spread the message of Buddhism throughout his vast empire and beyond.
It sounds like he was trying to create, like, a Buddhist utopia.
He certainly seems to have been deeply committed to applying Buddhist principles to governance.
Okay.
And his reign left an enduring legacy, not just in India, but across Asia, where he's still revered as, like, this model of righteous rulership.
That's a powerful example of how these philosophical debates
Yeah.
could have, like, a real impact on the course of history.
Right.
But let's zoom back in on the debates themselves for a second.
Okay.
You mentioned that, like, thinkers from different schools of thought were actively engaging with each other.
Right.
What were some of the key points of, like, contention?
One of the most fundamental debates centered around the nature of the self.
Okay.
The Vedic tradition, as we discussed, emphasized the idea of Atman, the individual soul. That's ultimately identical with Brahman, the ultimate reality. But some thinkers, particularly the Buddhists, they challenged this notion.
Wait, are you saying that they didn't believe in the soul?
It's not that they denied the existence of a self altogether. They just questioned the idea that it's like this fixed and eternal entity.
Okay.
They argued that what we perceive as the self is actually a constantly changing collection of thoughts, feelings, and sensations.
So instead of, like, a solid, unchanging soul, it's more like a fluid and ever-evolving stream of consciousness.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And this had profound implications for how they thought about life, death, and the afterlife.
Right.
If there's no permanent self, then what exactly is it that gets reborn?
Yeah, that's a head-scratcher for sure.
It is.
How did Buddhists reconcile the idea of rebirth with this, like, concept of a constantly changing self?
So they believed in rebirth, but they saw it as a process of continuation rather than, like, the transmigration of a fixed soul.
Okay.
They argued that our actions create karmic traces that shape our future lives.
Okay.
But there's no unchanging essence that gets reborn.
Okay, so it's less about a soul being reborn and more about the karmic consequences of your actions, kind of creating a ripple effect across lifetimes. Got it. And this debate about the nature of the self was just one of many philosophical issues that thinkers were, like, grappling with during this period.
Absolutely.
Another major point of contention was the concept of liberation.
Yes.
Right? We touched on that earlier.
Yeah.
That the Vedic tradition emphasized the pursuit of moksha, escaping the cycle of rebirth and uniting with Brahman.
Right.
But Buddhists and Jains offered these, like, different perspectives.
They did.
Right.
For Buddhists, nirvana was the ultimate goal.
Right.
A state of complete liberation from suffering and attachment. And it wasn't about merging with a higher power, but extinguishing the very flames of desire and ignorance that fuel that cycle of suffering.
And for Jains, liberation looked a bit different. Right?
Yes. Jainism emphasized the path of, like, rigorous asceticism and ethical conduct, leading to a state of perfect knowledge and liberation from the cycle of rebirth called Kevala Jnana.
Okay.
It was about purifying the soul through extreme self-discipline and nonviolence.
So even though all three traditions shared this goal of escaping the cycle of rebirth, they had very different ideas about, like, how to get there.
Yeah.
What about ethics? Did these, like, different worldviews lead to different ethical frameworks?
Ethics were central to all these traditions.
Okay.
The Vedic concept of Dharma, it emphasized fulfilling one's duties and living in accordance with that cosmic order.
Right.
Buddhists, they stressed compassion, nonviolence, and right action, as outlined in that eightfold path.
Yeah.
And Jains took this even further with their strict adherence to ahimsa,
Right.
extending nonviolence to all living creatures.
So it seems like there was like a lot of overlap in their ethical principles, even if their ultimate goals differed.
Right.
But didn't these different philosophies also have different implications for how, like, society should be structured?
Absolutely. The Vedic tradition, with its emphasis on the caste system
Right.
and social hierarchy, it provided a framework for a highly structured society.
Right.
But Buddhism and Jainism, with their focus on spiritual equality and individual responsibility,
Right.
they challenged this rigid social order.
So these new philosophies were kind of like a philosophical earthquake,
Yeah,
shaking up not just individual beliefs, but the very foundations of society itself.
exactly. They offered this vision of a more egalitarian society
Yeah.
where spiritual attainment wasn't limited by one's birth or social status.
Right.
And while they didn't immediately dismantle the caste system, they certainly planted seeds for social change
Right.
that would continue to unfold over centuries.
It's incredible to think about how these philosophical debates weren't just like abstract intellectual exercises.
No.
They were deeply intertwined with the like political, social, and even spiritual fabric of the Mahajanapada period.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just about ideas. This period also saw a flourishing of art and literature
Oh, yeah.
that reflected these diverse philosophical and spiritual currents of the time.
Right. We've talked about like the profound philosophical texts like the Upanishads, the Buddhist sutras, and Jain scriptures. But what about other forms of creative expression?
Think about the Great Stupa at Sanchi, for example. This massive dome-shaped monument
Yeah.
built by Ashoka to house relics of the Buddha.
Yeah.
It's a testament to the growing influence of Buddhism and the power of art to convey spiritual ideas.
I've seen pictures of it. It's breathtaking.
Yeah,
And it's still standing today,
it is.
like a physical reminder of this ancient philosophical and spiritual revolution.
Absolutely. And alongside monumental architecture, you also have the emergence of epic literature,
Yeah.
like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata.
Yeah, those sprawling tales filled with gods and heroes,
Right.
love and war, duty and destiny.
It's true.
They offered like a window into the values and beliefs of ancient Indian society.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And they're not just like great stories.
Right.
They're also exploring these profound philosophical themes,
Right.
Dharma, karma, the interconnectedness of all things.
Exactly. And these epic narratives have continued to resonate across centuries, shaping Indian culture. Yeah.
Inspiring artists, writers, and thinkers to this day.
Wow.
So you can see the Mahajanapada period wasn't just a time of political and social upheaval.
Right.
It was a period of immense creative ferment where new ideas were finding expression in art, literature, and even governance.
This is truly mind-blowing stuff. I'm starting to realize that to understand ancient India, you have to go beyond just like dates and battles.
Absolutely.
You have to like really delve into these philosophical debates
Yeah,
that were shaping the very fabric of society.
it's true. And what's so remarkable about the Mahajanapada period is that these weren't just esoteric philosophical discussions happening in isolation. They were having a real impact on how people lived their lives,
Yeah.
how rulers governed, and how society itself was structured.
Feeling a bit overwhelmed by all this information, but in a good way.
Yeah,
It's like we've uncovered this whole new layer of understanding about ancient India.
it is. It's a lot to take in, but it's a testament to the dynamism and intellectual vibrancy of this period.
Yeah. And it's important to remember that the legacies of this period, both philosophical and political, continue to shape India and the world to this day.
That's a great point.
It is.
Before we wrap up, I'm curious about how this era kind of paved the way for what we call classical Indian civilization. Did all this intellectual and creative energy eventually like coalesce into something even grander?
That's a great question. And it's something we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
All right.
We'll see how the seeds planted during the Mahajanapada period blossomed into a golden age of Indian civilization.
Okay, so we're back.
Yeah.
And my brain is like still buzzing from all those philosophical debates and political power plays of the Mahajanapada period.
I hear it.
It's amazing how those ancient ideas still resonate today.
It really is a testament to, the enduring power of those fundamental questions, right? About the self-liberation, the right way to live.
Right, exactly. But as you said, we need to like connect the dots
We do.
and see how this era kind of set the stage for what we call classical Indian civilization.
Yeah.
It feels like all this intellectual and creative energy, it just had to have a ripple effect.
It did.
Right.
It did.
Shaping the centuries that followed.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. One of the most obvious legacies of the Mahajanapada period is the rise of, like, these powerful new states and empires.
Right.
We can't talk about classical India without mentioning the Mauryan Empire.
Right. The Mauryan Empire.
Which emerged in the late 4th century BCE.
With emperors like Chandragupta Maurya and his grandson Ashoka.
Yeah.
They unified this huge chunk of the Indian subcontinent.
They did.
Creating this vast and complex imperial system.
Huge, huge.
It's like all those competing Mahajanapadas were finally brought under one banner.
They were. And that unification wasn't just about military might.
Okay.
The Mauryans, particularly Ashoka, they drew upon those very philosophical ideas we've been discussing to shape their vision of governance.
Right. Remember Ashoka's conversion to Buddhism?
Exactly.
Yeah, the emperor who renounced violence after witnessing the horrors of war and embraced that principle of ahimsa.
Yeah, it's almost like a real-life redemption arc, you know?
It is. It's so cool.
It is, and it had a profound impact on the spread of Buddhism.
Oh.
Ashoka, he went all in, sending out missionaries, building stupas and pillars inscribed with Buddhist teachings, promoting this philosophy of nonviolence and social welfare.
So it's like this powerful emperor using his influence to amplify a message of peace and compassion.
Exactly.
Talk about a philosophical legacy. But wasn't there more to the Mauryan Empire than just spreading Buddhism?
Absolutely. They developed these incredibly sophisticated systems of governance, administration, and infrastructure.
Okay.
Think about the Arthashastra.
We have Shastriya.
That ancient Indian treatise on statecraft.
Right, right.
It reflects a deep interest in the practical matters of ruling a vast and diverse empire.
It's like they were creating this blueprint for a well-functioning state.
Absolutely.
With everything from, taxation and diplomacy to law enforcement and public works.
Yeah, exactly. And that administrative legacy, it proved incredibly influential, for maintaining stability and fostering economic and cultural growth in subsequent centuries.
Right.
Later Indian empires would draw upon these foundations laid by the Mauryans.
Wow. So we've got these powerful empires rising, philosophical ideas shaping governance, and new religions like Buddhism gaining this, widespread acceptance.
Right.
But what about the intellectual and cultural landscape? Did that continue to evolve?
This is where it gets really exciting.
Okay.
The philosophical debates and spiritual explorations of the Mahajanapada period, they didn't just fade away.
Right.
They continued to shape Indian thought and literature for centuries.
Yeah.
We already talked about those foundational texts like the Upanishads, Buddhist sutras, and Jain scriptures. But they were just the beginning.
It's like they set the stage for even deeper explorations of the big questions.
Exactly. Thinkers continue to grapple with, the nature of reality, consciousness, ethics, and liberation, developing sophisticated philosophical and religious systems that would continue to evolve for centuries.
Okay.
And these weren't just theoretical discussions either. They had a real impact on how people lived their lives and understood their place in the cosmos.
And this intellectual ferment wasn't limited to philosophy and religion. We also see the flowering of other forms of literature.
Right.
Like those epic poems, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata.
Yes.
I remember reading those stories as a kid, just being completely captivated.
They're more than just great stories. They're cultural touchstones that have resonated with people for millennia.
Right.
Embedded in these narratives are those enduring themes of Dharma, karma,
the
complexities of human relationships, and the eternal battle between good and evil.
It's like they're encoding the values and beliefs of, an entire civilization.
Yeah.
Right, passing them down through generations.
It is. And they continue to inspire artists, writers, and thinkers even today.
Wow.
Think about all the different interpretations and adaptations of these edicts in music, dance, theater, and film.
Yeah.
That's a powerful cultural legacy.
That is. So we've got empires rising, philosophical ideas evolving, religions spreading, and epic literature capturing the imagination.
Right.
Was there anything else brewing during this transformative time?
We can't forget about the economic and social changes happening in parallel.
Okay.
The Mahajanapada period saw major advancements in agriculture, trade, and urbanization.
So alongside these philosophical and spiritual revolutions, there's also material progress happening.
Precisely. The growth of cities and the expansion of trade networks created new opportunities for economic and social mobility. People were interacting with different cultures, exchanging ideas and goods.
Yeah.
It was a time of dynamic change and growth on multiple levels.
Wow. It's incredible to think about how all these threads The political, the philosophical, the religious, the economic, and the social were all like interwoven, creating this incredibly rich tapestry that we now call like classical Indian civilization.
It is, and it's a civilization that would become renowned for its art, architecture, literature, philosophy, and scientific advancements.
Yeah.
The foundations for all of that were laid during that crucible of change
Right.
we call the Mahajanapada period.
It's amazing to think about how much we can learn from these ancient civilizations. It reminds us that even though the world has changed drastically, those fundamental questions, about how to live a meaningful life,
Right.
how to create a just society, how to understand our place in the universe,
Absolutely.
they're still relevant today.
They are. And perhaps by exploring these ancient wisdom traditions, we can gain new insights into those timeless questions.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, on that note, I think we're going to bring this deep dive to a close. But remember, the exploration doesn't end here. There's always more to discover, more to learn, and more to ponder about our own place in this vast and ever-changing universe. Until next time, keep diving deep.